Good morning and welcome to the Growth Mindset Show. My name is Mahesh Chanf. I'm founder of CSharpCorner. This Growth Mindset Show is every Friday, 10 a.m. And in this show, we talk about different topics, mostly around growth of software development and software developers. Our goal is to bring different topics. If you are joining us first time, welcome to the show. If you are coming back, welcome back to the show. I live here in Philadelphia. It's nice, bright, and sunny today. A little bit cold, about 40 degrees in Fahrenheit. Outside, a little bit chilly, but sunny. Nice day. Well, first of all, let me start with hopefully everybody is safe during this COVID time. It's pandemic is still growing, really big time. In the U.S., we have reached highest cases in this week, and like deaths are still growing. We have about almost every day 3,000 people are dying, which is crazy. This has never been before. So hopefully everybody watching the show is safe, stay wear mask, please. If you have to go outside, do the what's supposed to do, wash your hands. If you don't need to go in a group and travel or do any meetings, you don't need to stay home. That's the best way. And we're trying to do is find different ways to keep ourselves busy, and show is one of the way. We started this in on C Sharp Corner is we started a lot of virtual events, virtual meetings, virtual conferences in these shows. So today we have interesting topic. We are today going to talk about Angular versus Blazor. Angular, as we know, is one of the most popular JavaScript framework for building web applications, and Blazor is new compared to Angular, and that's our big topic today. If you have any questions in this show is all about you. If you have any questions, it can be about the Angular and Blazor. It could be it can be anything about your career, your jobs, community, pandemic, anything you want to share with us. Feel free to post in the comment. It's again, you can ask us any questions. We'll take questions in the in between of the show, and then maybe later half there'll be more questions. Today we have a guest, Michael Washington. Michael has been is a community guy for years. I know him, at least, personally. I met him at Microsoft MVP Summit years back, but he's been helping community for several years. He's 12 times Microsoft MVP. He's a author, written several programming books. Um, so let's invite Mike, our guest today, Michael Washington, and then we'll add more to his introduction. Again, if you have any questions for Michael, feel free to ask as well. Again, this show is for you, and we want to make sure you get benefit out of this show, watching this show. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you doing today? How's everything at your place, and where are you joining us from today?
Well, I'm coming from Los Angeles, specifically Pasadena. So yeah, we're right in the middle of the COVID thing. So we're all just staying at home, working from home, wearing a mask everywhere. I just got back from a run, and I had to have my mask on the entire time. So yeah, we're just trying to stay safe right now, and I wish the best for everyone out there.
Oh wow! Well, that looks like we have vaccine coming out soon. So
Yes.
hopefully, once this start rolling out, every week we should have millions probably getting it.
Yes. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. So Michael, I know I was telling our viewers here, I know you for several years
Yep.
now. We
Yeah.
usually meet at Microsoft MVP Summit. You have been in this community, Microsoft community, helping people for many years. You want to tell a little bit about how long you've been and what you've been, how you helping, and what makes you keep going back and give back to the community and keep helping.
Well, I definitely get a lot more from the community than I put back, so I just try to put back as much as I can. But yeah, I go back as a Microsoft Stack developer all the way back to classic ASP, actually, VB3, that sort of thing. So I've just stayed with the Microsoft Stack. So again, I went through the classic ASP, the early, .NET stuff. I became an MVP because I got involved with .NET Nuke, and that introduced me to open source. The whole idea of, you give away something for free, so Sean Walker is a big influencer of mine, and he still continues to be through there's a newer version of the .NET Nuke called Octane, and that's a Blazor application, so I'm still working with Sean Walker with that. But that's how I really became an MVP. And I remember, Mahesh, you and I would be on the bus, driving back and forth to the MVP Summit, and we'd be talking about things. So I've seen your incredible growth throughout you've been wildly successful. So a lot of us are, really are inspired by what you've done over the years, because, yeah, I knew you back when. So, so it's just funny. Everything comes full circle. So.
Hey, that's how it is. We all, small world, small world.
Yeah.
And I was talking to you a little bit ago that I have a client I advise a non-profit in LA, and I visit LA County,
right.
And you are in LA County. It's
yeah.
a small world.
So, yep. And so, yeah, luckily, we're in tech and we're still working. My wife, unfortunately, she worked for the hotel industry, and she's been, laid off since this whole thing began. So luckily, I can, take care of the family. But yeah, so many people are affected by this, and right now we're just doing our best, but the vaccines are coming. So hopefully people looking at this broadcast years from now will know that, during the darkest times, we're still holding strong, and it will definitely get better.
Well said, my friend. So Michael, I know you are 12 times Microsoft MVP.
Yep.
You have written programming books, and you run a website, Blazor Help website, as well as your ADAF server website. You want to talk a little bit about that so people at least get an idea?
Yeah, if you want to see the latest open source things that I've been working on, blazorhelpwebsite.com. That's will really take you to everything. And you kind of see there, the last blog post I did was on Octane, which is the large open source framework built on Blazor, again with Sean Walker of .NET Nuke fame, who, he's the guy who really got me into open source and MVP, helped me get my MVP back in the day. So that's the place to go if you really want to see what I'm doing and all my open source stuff. And that application, blazorhelpwebsite.com, is a Blazor application. So you can actually download the code and install it yourself. I have blogs on how I created that. So really, that's really the main link that leads you to everything that I've done. And of course, I've also written some books for Syncfusion, which are available for free. So this one is the Blazor WebAssembly book, and then there's another edition of the book that covers the same application in this book here, but it covers for Blazor server. So Blazor has two different hosting models, and when we get to that section of our back and forth debate, I'll explain the two different hosting models of Blazor and what that entails.
All right, great. So let's start. So anybody joining us, looks like a few more folks joined us just now. Welcome to the show. Today we have our guest here, Michael Washington. He is a 12 times Microsoft MVP, author, and community leader. We're talking about today. Our topic is Angular versus Blazor.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if you want to build your next application, if you are in a company and you are the decision maker, or you're building your own project, and you are kind of TypeScript, C# guy, so you want to build in the latest modern framework, obviously you have two choices, Angular and Blazor. Okay. Angular is obviously not 100% C#, but it does use TypeScript. Mm-hmm. So I want a little bit go back to Angular and Blazor's history. Angular started, it's open source. It's open source JavaScript library. You can go download, everything is open source. Yep. You can also get involved in the project. It's managed by Google team and open source community. Yep. Same thing, a little bit, you want to spend a little bit, let background on that. And also,
let's start with Angular first. And again, I'll just talk about my personal history. And just to keep in mind, Blazor is also open source. It's also on GitHub. Yep. It's all open source. So But let's first talk about Angular. So I don't know if Stephen can show a link of, there we go, ADEF Help Desk. So I got involved with Angular, God, I guess maybe it's going back 6 years or so. And the reason why I was drawn toward Angular is Angular, there's Angular Classic, which was pretty much like more of like a scripting sort of language. But then the modern, what we call Angular, it's based on TypeScript is, it's built on top of TypeScript natively, and TypeScript is a language that allows you to write code that is like C#. There's like a compiler, type checking, that sort of thing, and it then creates the JavaScript, transpiles the JavaScript that actually runs on the person's web browser. But as a programmer, you're able to use your object-oriented type checking language. So that's what got me really interested in Angular. And I created this application, ADEF Help Desk. Again, it's an open source, so you can go ahead and download it. And I really liked it. The experience, the development experience, you're able to make large applications. And then, of course, you start using it at work. And Angular really became pretty much the standard for creating web applications. But I do want to focus on just one quick thing, and that is Angular is what you call the front end. The back end, how you communicate with the database, how you communicate with the data, how you communicate with other services, the platform that the application runs on has always been C#. So in everything I'm talking about today, the back end is C#. And there was to get Angular to talk to the C#, there's a I don't know if I call it a service, but this thing created called JavaScript services. And it's interesting because it was created by Steve Sanderson. Steve Sanderson happens to be the creator of Blazor. So again, everything kind of comes full circle. But I had a lot of experience with Angular. I actually wrote a book on the creating of ADEF Help Desk. I was very, very deep into Angular. So that's why I think I wanted to come on the show to kind of talk about my experience from Angular to Blazor. What are the differences, and why moving forward I'm Blazor all the way.
Yeah, no, that's good. And again, your this website and this sort of project is all available open source. People
Yes.
can download this,
Yes.
and they can also read your blog to learn how you built that.
How they built it. And there's also a book. There's also a book on Amazon that I wrote called ADEF Help Desk 4. And it goes very deep into the whole program and how it works and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, there are obviously some people, there's a lot of applications are still being built in Angular. And I talk to, some of my clients, large corporations, they're all using Angular because Blazor being so new, right?
Right.
So, one point also I want to cover before we jump into the Blazor side is that what are the major advantage of using Angular compared to other JavaScript frameworks? And there are a ton of out there, and obviously React is one of them. Yeah.
The biggest one is the fact that TypeScript is really native, built in natively to Angular is a big thing, because if you're dealing with JavaScript, any JavaScript framework, you want to be using TypeScript. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there's a number of plugins, so that if, for example, you need to show a PDF file or something, there's a plugin for that. So it's got the biggest ecosystem for plugins, the most documentation. When a lot of programmers are using something, if you need to get contractors or that sort of thing, it's easier to get somebody for something that's more widely used. There are other JavaScript frameworks. Vue is another one that comes up a lot. But if you're trying to hire a contractor, let's say on the West Coast, it's easier getting an Angular contractor than it would be, say, for some of the other JavaScript frameworks. Also, Angular is more complete. Whereas with other JavaScript frameworks, they only do, say, a part of the application. You still have to, roll your own for other parts of the application. So its size, its ecosystem, the fact that, TypeScript is built natively to it, these are the advantages of Angular. Angular does work, so I don't want to imply that it doesn't work well. So you know.
Yeah, and I believe a lot of these component vendors like Syncfusion,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah, plenty of
Data
components. Yes.
Express, Infragistics, they all have Angular libraries and
Yes.
controls as well, right?
Right. So that's a big plus.
That helps like building data grid or some kind of other
Yes.
controls,
Right.
calendar control, so you don't have to write code your own and you can really easily. And licensing is pretty cheap for those components also. You
Yes.
can
Yeah.
save a
Most of
lot
them
of
are free.
money. Yeah.
Most are free, and the licensing is small. Is comparable for with the big component vendors like Syncfusion and Telerik and that sort of thing. Yeah, the licensing is very reasonable.
Yeah. So you would say, it's easier to build, applications using these controls and components.
Yes, a big ecosystem is a big plus.
Yeah. Um, all right. Looks like we have a few more folks joining us. Welcome to the show. It's a growth mindset show. My name is Mahesh Chand. I'm here in Philadelphia. Again, guys, if you have any questions, just keep posting those questions. We will try to cover most of your questions in the second half of the show. Today, we are talking about Angular versus Blazor. If you are building your new application and you don't know which one to pick between Angular and Blazor, today our goal is to clarify that and maybe help you make the decision. And
Yes.
here I'm with Michael Washington. He's worked with both Angular and Blazor, and that's what we're sharing today. If you have any questions, guys, feel free to post those questions. So we just talked about Angular, its background, and you build an application, you share your experience. Let's talk about Blazor. Blazor is very new compared to Angular, and it's basically by Microsoft and
Yes.
open source, free, available free.
Yeah, very
There's a
free.
lot of free content available on that as well, and it's a licensing is Apache licensing 2.0. You want to talk a little more about history of Blazor? Um,
Yeah, actually, let's finish up on the Angular,
okay.
and the reason why, as far as definitely in my personal projects and also in my work projects where I have an influence as an application architect, I'm moving forward with just using Blazor for all new applications, and the reasoning is not that there's anything wrong with Angular. The problem is that in order to create applications in Angular, you have to use a thing called NPM, Node Package Manager.
Yep. Hmm.
That's the problem. That's the problem. The biggest problem with Node Package Manager is um, it it really is Node Package Manager. If for those who are just say from the Microsoft stack, it's comparable to when you pull down components through your Visual Studio and you're pulling down components. It's a way to pull things into your application. However, the problem that we run into with Node is that you end up pulling in our average application. You end up pulling in 30,000 to 60,000 files are required. And the problem is that instead of having a company like Microsoft who makes, let's say, 90 to 95% of the application, and you only have to pull in, say, 10% more from, outside component vendors and that sort of thing. When you're doing an Angular application, the stuff that's being pulled down is by several different organizations. Literally hundreds of separate organizations have created the components that are required to be
Oh,
pulled
wow.
down for your application. So when you start a new Angular application, you basically have to have Node running. You have to, kind of go into npm install, which tells Angular, okay, great, install yourself. And then Angular says, hey, I need all these components by all these organizations, and it starts to pull stuff in. Well, when those components start to come in, they go, oh, well, we have, our component is made up of other people's components. So it starts pulling that in. So you start to pull down tens of thousands of files. Well, when you first do your, hit F5, you run the thing, you're like, okay, it works. Even though I've now pulled down at this point, like say 20,000 files, it works and it's fine. Here's the problem. Any one of those components can break something. And if you start looking at the warnings, you see all these massive warnings. They go, this has been deprecated. You're like, well, I should fix this. But if you try to fix this, there's a bunch of other components that can use that component, and you'll break this other thing. And you're thinking, okay, well, don't they know this? Remember, they're all separate organizations. Many of them are open source. They're like some guy in some country somewhere who's just doing the best he can. He's not trying to hurt you, but hey, his stuff is affecting your stuff. One line of code that goes bad, and your entire application may not start. So, and it's funny. It was after you and I agreed to do this show. I ran into a problem about 2 days ago where this one component doesn't work with Internet Explorer. And, because we tested the whole thing, but because it didn't work with Internet Explorer, we tried to, we're going to try to fix it. And when we upgraded that one component, and this was just a minor thing to display a PDF a file inside, the application. When you tried to run the application, the whole thing just wouldn't start at all. I mean, not like, that one page didn't work. The entire thing, because the TypeScript has to be transpiled into JavaScript. If there's one little error, the entire thing doesn't start. So, a developer had to spend almost 2 days trying to slowly compare it to an application that did work and figure it out that this one little component, which is, again, it's open source, it's by, some well-meaning person. They weren't trying to break the app. Right. So much time was spent just tracing that one thing down. These are the problems that we don't have with Blazor. Microsoft makes most of the app. Microsoft is, they talk to, all parts talk to each other, and they keep things running well. So the NPM part is really the problem. Everything is very, very brittle. Never do you have an application with Angular that I've done of medium size where every time you try to compile it, you don't see tons of errors and warnings. Oh, actually not errors, but the warnings. Right. And you can't fix it. I mean, literally, the average application now has 60,000 files. Where do you begin? So it's the idea of NPM, and being very democratic and open, and therefore it can grow big and that sort of thing. The problem is it creates too many dependencies that cannot be managed. And it's brittle. And and that's why when Blazor came out, I really looked at it because it gives us the stability that you would have with, say, for example, an MVC application, or even, let me go back to even a web forms application. Those applications, they just work, and that's what Blazor gives us back. It gives us back a stable structure where stuff just works.
Yeah, and I believe because there's so many files are being downloaded, if you want to take even containerize it and deploy it on some kind of your cloud, I guess for the size of that application would be huge.
Yeah. So So really, like I said, it's the development process that really has the biggest issue. Obviously, deployment, you have issues there. And also, again, the other thing is with JavaScript, again, like I said, we have this issue where we're still having to support Internet Explorer, which, of course, people should not be using, but you always got
listen, they do, and especially companies, government companies, they have users, you cannot force them to change their browsers.
Right. So there's that. So then let's get into Blazor. So with Blazor, like I said, you have there's one Blazor, but it has two different hosting models.
Well, before you go there, let's make sure everybody understand that Blazor is, again, it's from Microsoft initially, managed by Microsoft team, and it's open source, means anybody can get involved as part of the project.
Yep.
Download it, look at everything.
Yep.
And it's free.
Yep.
And it's basically compared to, there's nothing it's not like a previous versions where you need if you need to write Blazor applications, you can use in a Visual Studio Code, which is a free IDE and editor, right?
Yep.
Or you can use Visual Studio Community. I personally use Visual Studio Community because me being background on C# and .NET, I'm used to Visual Studio. I try not to go to those new editors, and you have to install npm and this and that. So before we go to Blazor, I want to share my experience. I was just
Yes.
trying to play with the React,
Okay.
and I'm like, I just want to write the simple app, install npm, and like, really, it just saves me when I go to command line. I'm too old for command lines, man. I want to just be Visual Studio, open my thing, and create my application and get going. But I agree with you, npm. I do not like that part. So yeah, go ahead. Share a little bit more on Blazor, like how the project started. You said Steve Anderson came in; he was part of the team. A little bit more on that before we get into client versus server.
So just real quick on Steve Sanderson, and again, a programmer that I admire greatly, as far as probably one of the smartest, most forward-thinking, most influential programmers that maybe some people have never heard of. But he created. He's done a lot of stuff over the years. Matter of fact, Knockout JS was, I think, his big thing into that made him famous. But I encountered him when he created this thing called JavaScript services, and it allowed not just Angular, but a number of other JavaScript frameworks, including Knockout at the time, to easily work inside Visual Studio to talk to your back-end C# code. Well, the man is really an expert in JavaScript, languages and that sort of thing. So he, on his own, created a project where he was trying to allow people to achieve what you can do in these JavaScript frameworks, but basically do it in C# or C# like language, which really
object oriented.
Yeah, object oriented. Which is pretty much like an MVC application. It's C#, but it's the Razor syntax. So that's what he came up with. It's basically, you can do what you can do in JavaScript using the Razor syntax. So, and this is an oversimplification, but in my opinion, what you end up with is MVC. Okay, so if you're familiar with MVC, you basically end up with an MVC app that doesn't have postbacks. So what I mean by postback is that if you have an MVC app, the page comes up, a person clicks a button, there's the web browser has to be refreshed. It goes to the, and it goes back and comes in. So what Blazor allows you to do is your application looks like an MVC app. You have your markup, you have your code behind, your C# code. Yet when they click on the button, there's no postbacks. And the page is called is a Razor page. In the extension is .razor. That's pretty much what Blazor, an oversimplification. That's what it is. It has two hosting models. So one model is what we call server-side Blazor, and that one really is just like an MVC app without the postbacks. There's another hosting model called Blazor WebAssembly. And this uses a technology which is, again, it's an open source technology that actually does not belong to Microsoft, called WebAssembly. And what WebAssembly is it's not a plugin officially, but as an oversimplification, it is a plugin. Okay. Sorry, it's just that web browsers, if it's built into the web browser when you download it, it's not considered a plugin. But really, it's this thing that runs programs inside your web browser the way that Flash used to run. Honestly, the way the Silverlight used to run. It's a thing that so instead of having to use JavaScript to do functionality, this thing is what runs. So WebAssembly, so Blazor can run in WebAssembly, and to the end user, it just looks like everything's running on the page. But that's not JavaScript that's running on the page. That's WebAssembly that's running on the page. And inside what WebAssembly is running is your Blazor program. So Blazor can run in either mode. The Razor code, which is Blazor, is the same, whether it's running inside WebAssembly or running server-side Blazor. The reason why that hosting model is very important as a difference is that when it's running as WebAssembly, it's very much like Angular. Your code is just client-side code, and to communicate with the back end, it has to make HTTP calls or web API calls to the back end. When Blazor is running in Blazor server mode, like an MVC app, it doesn't have to do that. So you literally can have just some code in the markup, some code in the, this, what we call the code behind file, and there's no clicking of the, no refreshing of the web browser. Everything just moves as, fast and whatever, and you need a lot less code. So just really quickly, for Syncfusion, I wrote 2 books, and both books walk you through 100% of all the code you would need to create the applications. Both books create the exact same application. It's a little help desk application where a person puts in a help desk ticket, it sends an email to an administrator, the administrator logs in, they can see the help desk ticket, they can add comments, it emails back to the user can keep going back and forth, they can close a ticket, there's a grid, a Syncfusion grid that allows you to sort and that sort of thing. So I built the application as a Blazor server application and the exact same application as a Blazor WebAssembly application. The Blazor WebAssembly application, the Blazor code is about the same amount, but the back end code, there's twice as much needed for the Blazor WebAssembly version of it. So, but they're both considered Blazor, but the hosting model is different.
Yeah.
And the reason why a person would, for example, want to use, say, Blazor WebAssembly versus Blazor Server is, if you use Blazor Server, you must use C#.net as your backend. If you use Blazor WebAssembly, your backend could be, anything. So, all these other technologies, you could use as your back end, Firebase, or whatever. So that's one of the major reasons why a person would say, I want to use Blazor WebAssembly versus Blazor Server.
So if you are, a person like me whose background is C#, .NET, I come from Windows, Blazor Server seems to be easier for me because it's my kind of space I've been doing for so long. And then if you are a JavaScript background, you've never done, .NET and C#, but you want to build probably Blazor app because that's the new big thing you like. You probably better want a WebAssembly as long as you're okay with, running WebAssembly, running in that. Okay, that kind of makes sense. So what we will do is we will take a little break, 2 minutes break, 3 minutes break. We will be right back. We have a few questions. We'll take all of your questions, guys. Everybody who is joining the show, welcome to the show. Make sure your questions are posted because we're going to start taking questions soon. We will be right back in 2 minutes.
Here at Mindcracker, we create artificial, virtual, and mixed reality games and apps, voice-enabled skills and apps, and intelligent apps, and integrate AI with IoT products. We offer advisory services for innovations and startups. We provide cloud and code security and performance services. We also offer AI/ML blockchain development, consulting, and training. Just visit www.mindcracker.us to make your dreams into a reality. COVID makes us feel like this, and work from home like this. But what if work looked like this? With a leader like this, and a payday that feels like this. Learn how to change your mind and your mindset with the Growth Mindset Show every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern.
Hey guys! Can't believe we haven't seen each other since graduation in May. What's going on?
Not much. With the pandemic, I can't really do anything right now.
Me too. I mostly just stay at home, hang out with my dog, and watch the news.
I feel you. Have you guys been able to get jobs yet?
Funny that you ask. Gary and I actually have been working on something together.
Yeah, we came up with an idea for a startup that's an app that will help us stay active since we both have been sitting around so much during this quarantine.
That's genius. I could definitely use something like that. When are you guys launching it?
Well, that's the issue. We don't really know how to build it, so we're kind of stuck.
I know of this company that does startup advising if you guys are interested.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're called Mindcracker, and they'll help you validate your idea, and connect you with angel investors and help you build everything from your product MVP to your technical team and even your go-to market planning and execution.
Wow, that's awesome. Do you know how we could get in touch with them?
Yeah, you can just visit their website, mindcracker.us.
That's awesome, May. Thanks. I'm excited to get started on this.
Of course. Good luck, guys, and let's talk soon.
Thanks, May.
All right, welcome back to the show. We are back. We are here today talking about Angular versus Blazor. I am here. I have a guest, Michael Washington. Expert in Blazor. We have a question actually following by exactly what you just talked about. Why should you choose Blazor over Angular? Simon, you want to put the question here? The question is, so next one. This is not really the question. Yeah, there you go. So this is the question. I want to build an ERP app for a school. How would you, Angular versus Blazor, how would you select which one you choose?
Well, so keep in mind, Angular can definitely create the application that you need to create. Okay. However, Blazor can also create the application that you want to create. The issue becomes, is speed of development and ease of maintenance important to you? If that's the case, then the decision that I've made is that Blazor is the winner, hands down. So during the break, I went to the Sync Fusion book, Blazor Succinctly, and I know the link was placed in there. And I actually wanted to see, I know that on purpose, I made sure I covered every single line of code in the application. Okay, every single line of code is covered. I walk you through every single line of code in the application, and it's only 86 pages. There's no way I could, if it was an Angular application, could I cover every single line of code in 86 pages? As a matter of fact, and I'm just being totally honest, I don't know if I could cover every single line of code in 900 pages. So, right there.
So you would say there's a lot more code you have to write if you're using Angular?
A lot more code. And here's the other thing. It's not just the amount of code. It's the complexity. So especially if you're using Blazor Server, the complexity is just not there. Everything is pretty straightforward. Put the markup for a button here. When they click the button, write this method down here that says, grab these fields and save it to the database. Very straightforward. With Angular, I would say, okay, create first, do all these imports. Now set, this file to talk to this file. Now configure it so this talks to this thing. Okay, now we're about to do the button. Okay, the button goes to this method here, but now this method has to go to a service. Configuring a service, there's a special component created by the way, a different organization that indicates how my code will talk to the service. Is this the thing that's talking to the back end? No, this is just the service that inside that service, it then talks to your C# code. Okay, now we're going to start writing that C# code. So just for a simple button click, we're into like 20 different files with very careful configuration that if you get one thing wrong, you're done, man. So it's just a magnitude of I would say a factor of 10 versus doing the same thing in Blazor as I would in Angular. So Angular, it's a good technology. It does work, but it's compelling to say to somebody, you know what, you can do this thing 10 times faster with 10 times less code. So therefore, hopefully that answers the person's question.
And to add, he's writing this for a school, so I'm sure schools don't have a lot of resources. They don't have full-time people just maintaining your, software. You just build there and hopefully it works, right? So I would say there's definitely low maintenance compared to Angular if you are using Blazor.
And one more thing about the teams.
Yeah.
So with Angular, you pretty much need a team. And as you all know, when you have people working together, you spend a lot of time just managing the fact that people have to work together. you know.
Yeah.
The nice thing I've had with Blazor is, you know, even in my work, when I put a person on a Blazor application, I put one person on it.
Yeah.
One person. And we're talking about some really big applications where people are uploading files, and I've got, you know, trees opening up and you know, just massive stuff going on. One developer is all it needs. One developer. So therefore, because that person's of course working by themselves, they're even working even faster. With Angular, I can't just put one developer on a project because there's so much to do. You know, you have to have a team. So that's another thing, is that, you know, you can put one developer on a Blazor application and they can, you know, leave them alone for 2 weeks and they'll come back with, you know, it's done. So, so there's that. So, so yeah, that's the decision I make. However, I do not want to imply that Angular can't, you know, do that ERP application. No, Angular can do it, and they can do it just fine.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of large applications, live, scalable, already built in Angular, right? That
Right, I've built them, and they're still running.
Yeah. But it's the matter of choice now. Now we have a choice. Now we have a different choice. Yeah. So continue that. There's two more questions from Amit. This question is Amit.
Good one. This is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and read this
Then
one.
if
So
you can, these two questions, they're kind of, we can combine both of them, right?
well, actually, no. Let's take them separate. I really think it's separate. Okay. So
Okay,
the
go.
Blazor server. So someone is basically saying, okay, well, Blazor server, it needs this continuous connection. And what happens is that Blazor server, what it does is it uses actually a very thin JavaScript layer to launch its runtime, but it's a very, very thin thing, and you don't have to code it. It runs. But what it does is it sets up what they call a Signal R connection. Or connection that uses the technology of Signal R, which constantly communicates with the backend server to maintain the state of the application. And when a person, for example, clicks on a button, Signal R sends a message to the server, says, hey, they clicked on a button, and the server goes, oh, okay, well, we'll change the page to this, and it sends back what we call a diff, D-I-F-F, back to you know, through the Signal R back to that little thin layer of JavaScript, and it goes, oh, I need to repaint, you know, just move that button over here, or show a little label. So this thing is constantly going. So people were concerned with the fact that if you have to maintain this connection, if you have a lot of people hitting your site, aren't you using up too much? Is it going to require too much server resources and that sort of thing? So Microsoft did publish benchmarks. And essentially what they showed is that if you were hosting your site, say in Azure, with a $70 a month you know, app service plan, basically you can just take thousands of simultaneous users of your application without a problem. And in my experience, I've been running Blazor applications in pretty much kind of production for over 3 years, even though I think production was only supposed to be about 2 years ago, but you know, and I'm telling you, I never had a problem. And you know, even on all my websites are all running, you know, in Azure. My personal stuff is running in Azure, and if you look at the resources of the app service, it barely peaks 1 to 2%. You know, and I'm running about, you know, $70 a month the app service plan. So, so I understand why someone would be concerned about that, but I'm telling you, in practice, it's not an issue. That's just my personal experience.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. And here's, let's take
the second question. Okay, so the second question is, yes, the problem with WebAssembly, which is actually the exact same issue that Angular and all the other JavaScript frameworks have, is that when the person first comes to your application, they need to download, for the most part, there's exceptions to this, but for the most part, they need to download all the application into their web browser.
In the cloud browser,
before things start running. So this was true with Silverlight. This is true with Flash, and it's true for the most part. There's exceptions, of course, but for the most part with Angular or even any of the other JavaScript frameworks. So there's like this little delay, and that's why you'll see a little waiting symbol or spinning thing while that happens. A couple of things. One, you can compartmentalize it so that only the first part of the application has to be downloaded, and the other parts are downloaded as people invoke those things. Number two, WebAssembly is the reason why, and that technology is getting better and better. So they're improving the loading speeds as time goes on. But however, with that said, Blazor Server, which does not have that problem, is in my experience, is massively faster than Blazor WebAssembly. So that's another reason why I use Blazor Server. It's faster to develop and it runs faster. There is no technology in all the time I've been writing programs, and I go all the way back to, web programs all the way back to 1998, I guess. No technology is faster than Blazor Server, in my opinion. So there's that.
What is the fastest right now, as of now? As Apple says, iPhone 12 is the fastest iPhone ever.
Yeah, tomorrow there'll be something different. But seriously, Blazor.
I laugh hard. Like, obviously, it has the newest iPhone. Obviously,
I would hope so. As much as they charge, yeah. But I will say a couple of other things real quick. Blazor Server WebAssembly programs, they actually are indexed by Google and Bing. So that was normally a negative of, especially I know back with Silverlight, it's like you can't index it, it would not be indexed by, the search engine. So SEO is very important, Yeah. However, Google and Bing, they actually will index a WebAssembly app. So that's actual plus. So right now, this person's question, a very good question. It's very relevant. And I would just say to you that if this is something that you've been encountering, number one, can you use Blazor Server? If you can, boom, the problem goes away. But number two, they are constantly making improvements so that the problem is slowly going away. And if you have a lot of images and that sort of thing, you can not put the images, in your WebAssembly app and just have like it, be referred to from a CDN or something like that. So that's also something else that I might look at if this were my situation.
All right, that's great. That's great. Let's take another question here. This is a quick question for you. Simon, you want to put...
the question was, if they want to work with Blazor, which back-end language would I have to know? If you work with Blazor Server, it must be done in C#. If you use Blazor WebAssembly, you can use the back-end language of your choice. So
yeah, so if you're a .NET and C# background doing Microsoft, for you choice is easy. Blazor Server makes sense to me without even a question, right?
Mr. CSharpCorner.
Yes. Exactly. And performance is the key for me, right? Performance is very important, right? Yep. And I'm not a big fan of JavaScript, okay? I don't like, messy things around in my code. I want to make sure they're organized the way I like.
Blazor Server is for you,
It's scripting everywhere where you don't know what's going on, what it does until you run it.
But I do want to point out though, if you do have a back end that you do prefer, like hey, I like PHP or something like that, which of course I know is more of a front end, but just if you have other back ends that you like to use, that is the reason why a lot of people do use Blazor WebAssembly, or also known as Blazor Client, because it allows you to use Blazor for the front end, but it will work easily with the back end of your choice. So hopefully that gives that person some guidance that you do have a choice.
Yeah, or somebody doesn't want to learn C# or
or the back end is some different back end. That just
exactly.
It just is what it is, For example, a WCF. So there's a lot of people who, for example, have WPF apps that they want to put on the web. Let's say they have some Silverlight stuff they need to migrate. So these people have a back end built on WCF or ASMX. which could be C# or in some cases VB.net. I mean, come on, right?
Yeah.
So those people, you literally can make it a Blazor WebAssembly app, which communicates with those backends. That's doable because they've got literally hundreds of thousands of lines of code that they're like, I don't want to throw this away. It's actually working for me. So for those people, I would say yes, look at Blazor WebAssembly. That's something that could work for you.
Yeah, definitely. So, one thing I have question is this question I have is, how, let's say we start building, obviously one of my project is coming up and we are going to figure it out, Blazor versus, Angular or even React. So an application will use some components, some controls, like charting, or it can be reporting, or it can be some grades and whatever. Or what kind of support Blazor already has or does not have from the component side? These component vendor already have start building control libraries like those DevExpress and all that.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's actually a huge thing for Blazor. So remember, Blazor, again, is an oversimplification, so people will be critical of me for making this thing, but Blazor server is pretty much MVC without the postbacks. And from MVC era days or whatever, that you can get this component which you just drop it in, and that grid can easily communicate with the database with not a lot of lines of code because it's all in one place. When the JavaScript frameworks came out, the component vendors had a problem. You had all this, their component had to sit in this JavaScript layer, but then to communicate with the back end, there's all this stuff you kind of have to do to kind of make it work, but it's very separate and it's not a unified experience. If you go forward with Blazor Server, because it's all unified, you end up with a situation where you just drop the grid from the component vendors on the page. You indicate the data source, that this grid should talk to.
Like any control.
It just does it. So that's why the SyncFusion book, I'm able to get through every line of code you need in 86 pages because seriously, there's basically this admin section where you build the admin section from scratch in 10 pages. I basically go, drop the SyncFusion grid on the page, wire it up to this one data method that I walked you through in earlier pages, and then just hit F5 and look, it sorts it pages, it just does it all for you. So all the component vendors, all the major companies, as well as the open source companies like Radzen, does some open source, free open source, like a NuGet package, you just download it. They all just create these components. They're just so easy to use that it's just, you're like, oh, this is great. They also create components for Blazor WebAssembly, but those components aren't as tightly integrated as the ones, they don't give you an end-to-end experience the way that the Blazor server would, but they do, especially for those components that are just UI only, they work the same and they're really fine. So the component vendors are full in with Blazor. They've all, they're fully behind it. And life is good again for them because honestly, it was the dark days for them when you had the rise of the JavaScript frameworks because the component vendors couldn't give that full, easy to use experience that they had in the past. With Blazor, life's back, it's good again, and it's full on. So that's another compelling reason that if you're used to using components to speed development, for ease of maintenance, for the support. That's another reason for using components is that if you go with a component vendor, you're really paying for support. Okay, that's why they you can get their components for free. It's like you can always download the stuff for free. It's the support that you're paying for. So if that's important to you, and it should be, time is money, then that's another compelling reason to use Blazor.
Yeah, and I think how one of the biggest challenge for developers if we are building these large applications is also like a tooling, right? IntelliSense and like debugging, testing and look at the variables and I'm assuming that this Blazor server is much easier, similar to what we've been doing for so long in Visual Studio.
Especially for end-to-end. So again, you can still do the testing and that sort of thing with Blazor WebAssembly. So I don't want to imply that there's any difference there. But when you're an application architect, you're thinking end to end.
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm. Yeah.
So for an end to end experience, Blazor Server is why I use Blazor. The only time I actually use Blazor WebAssembly for any of my projects is if I have a situation where the person is going to be running this app on a phone and they may not have an internet connection. In that case, a Blazor WebAssembly app allows me to create an app, and again, the person can have like a little icon that shows up on their phone, and when they click on the app, if there is no internet connection, the app will still open up, and it can have like a local database, it can say, okay, well, here's the data I last downloaded, and when we get the connection to the internet. So to have that sort of experience, I would have to use Blazor WebAssembly for that. So that is the only time I've personally gone into using Blazor WebAssembly, because again, with Blazor Server, it's kind of like an MVC app. If a person had an icon on their phone, they double clicked on it, but they weren't connected to the internet, it would come up blank page. So I do want to kind of point that out.
That's a good question, actually. Good point. Which is, if you are building a progressive web app where you want to cache a lot of and want to basically target mobile devices, WebAssembly is something you want to look into compared to.
Yes, that's another reason for using the Blazor WebAssembly version. Yes.
And that's probably WebAssembly existed to compete with other JavaScript framework. They can support, progressive web apps or these mobile.
Because Angular can also do that. So an Angular app can also be a progressive web app. A person opens it up, there's no internet connection. An Angular app, could be programmed to still work and pull, from a local in-memory database. So yes, Angular also can do that too.
Yeah, we definitely have built a React and Angular. They are PWAs,
okay,
with some support. Yeah, so that's a good thing. So that's good to know, right?
Yes.
Because obviously mobile presence is good depending on the client. Some clients say we must run this on mobile.
So one more thing, if you do decide to go mobile, Xamarin does have I think it's still experimental, that allows you to create Xamarin apps using Blazor syntax. But then, of course, what Xamarin gives you is it gives you that equal structure for deployment and write once and still have an Android version and an iOS version. So if you are interested in that, I would look at the Xamarin offering. And the reason why Xamarin is doing that is that the Blazor syntax is so easy to use, and again, this equal structure, this ecosystem that we've been talking about. Is also very compelling. That's a reason for wanting to mash those two things together.
All right. Wow, that's great. I learned a lot. If you guys have any other questions, we have one last minute to go. Feel free to ask questions. But looks like you covered a lot, Michael. We covered, both, and I think I got some of my questions answered. Frankly speaking, anything you want to add to our users in the end?
Again, I just, my site, blazorhelpwebsite.com, is where you can see what I'm working on. But also Octane, OQTANE.org, is the open source framework that allows you to, instead of having to build the entire website, Octane allows you to make, for example, just a module. And then you install Octane, you install just your module, yet you get the full website of membership management and logging and all sorts of text-based editors and all that sort of thing. So that's another project that I'm very involved in, and it's something that you might want to look at if you're looking to make Blazor applications, yet you want more help and more ease of creating those applications. So Octane.org is the thing that I think people might want to look at, and it's something that I'm very involved in. It's an open source product.
Yeah, and I believe people can reach out to you and follow you on Twitter and ask you questions. You're always on Twitter, I know. I'm sure you're available on LinkedIn as well.
Yep.
So if you guys still have more questions, just follow Michael on Twitter and just shoot him some questions.
Yep.
All right, that was awesome. Thank you so much for coming that early. you have a, we learn a lot, and hopefully you enjoy your day and have a safe next few weeks until we get this COVID vaccine.
Yes, you too, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Bye.
Bye.